What is your professional background and what is your current professional situation?
So I am by training a power system engineer and then did an MBA. I did most of my career in the technology field so far, Alstom and then GE in smart technologies, and then for the last 2 years I'm now the Secretary General of ENSTO-E, with an association facilitating collaboration between transmission system operators in Europe, as well as responding to certain legal mandates when it comes to developing pan-European system development plans, developing network codes, as well as monitoring of the implementation of these network codes.
How would you describe the current electricity landscape?
The current electricity landscape is rapidly changing with the wide introduction of distributed energy resources, renewable storage. We saw recently at the Paris Auto Show also now electrical vehicles coming as a big wave into our system, and that changed the pattern of the flow, the way the system is used, introduced much more co-optimization of flows between the lower level distribution and the highest level of transmission and energy markets.
What are the biggest challenges the electricity sector is facing right now?
So the challenge are around the fact that this energy transition does require the massive construction of grid assets. So that means being able to deploy fast these assets, getting permitting, acceptance of these assets on one side, but also on the other side, recognizing that these deployments do not move as fast as what renewable introduction come into the system, is being able to maximize usage of the existing assets in view particularly of the life cycle and the aging of these asset infrastructures.
In terms of asset management, what are your thoughts about how it is being handled right now?
So asset management is definitely a key area of development for transmission system operators. At ENSTO-E, we have a role of facilitating innovation between transmission system operator, and we have few existing working groups who are sharing best practices onto how to move one step forward onto what I would call dynamic asset management, in connecting the historical asset repository with real-time data feed from the field, which is then able to size the impact of the operation into the asset aging.
Are there any tools or solutions that are looking to address these constraints?
So as part of our innovation, we do have innovation hubs, and among these innovation hubs, we have innovation hubs related to, I would say, equipment of the grids, as well as digital technology. And we do see really new partnerships and new approach being established between equipment supplier and software startup vendors to try to better mimic what I would call the digital twin of these assets, so that we can really predict the capability of the asset at a certain time in the day, but also project it into its asset life cycle.
In what ways would having a holistic and systemic approach help companies achieve their KPIs? What are the benefits?
So we do see that one of the challenges is to be able to zoom these asset management approach onto specific grid operational constraints, maybe areas of the system where congestion exists, where transmission system operator would like to increase usage of these assets in certain conditions. So having a broad view of the system in general is very important, and we currently build together ENSTO-E and TSOs and regional security coordinator a common grid model of these assets, so that all these calculations can be made in a consistent manner. Calculations are largely done at the TSO level as part of their operational role, and what we put in place at ENSTO-E is a data layer which allows to share these operational data between the various control centers of TSOs and security coordination centers.
What are some examples of how people have been adopting a systemic approach?
So we have had recently the release of our 10-year network development plan, and as part of that release we did have a specific report around new technologies being brought into the system as a whole, and we really see a very interesting example being, for instance, dynamic line ratings. I would name one of the startup which is working in this environment is, for instance, Ampassimon, working on this specific topic, or trying to use devices into the system to be able to reroute flows during certain conditions. I have in mind maybe smart wires as one of these. And I've also heard about interesting prototyping done with Cosmo tool by one of our association TSO with RTE in France, and which is really, I think, from a digital point of view, showing an interesting way to develop this notion of digital twin of the grid asset.
How does Cosmo Tech answer the needs of the electricity sector?
So Cosmo Tech, as far as I know, I don't know Cosmo Tech from the background of ENSTO-E, but from what I knew in my past technology environment. And I've always been surprised of the new modeling approach which Cosmo Tech is having on, and this new concept of looking at that broad systemic perspective as a system of systems interacting with each other, and that's really how we see this entire system constituted of subsystems and system of systems, and that's an approach which match pretty much these architecture of future systems. So when we want to relate data from these various systems together, I think as far as I remember, the tools are quite innovative, and I'm very much interested to hear in the future how Cosmo Tech is progressing into developing this model further with RTE.
What type of approaches actually help asset managers make better decisions? How can they justify these decisions to regulators?
So one of the critical elements which we see into these innovation into the system is to be able to engage in a certain level of quantification of benefits with regulators, and linking basically benefits on the technical and data side with savings in terms of grid performance. And this is something which is very important. Is when we look at this digital twin of the grid in a way, it has to be related to certain use cases, certain savings over long-term regulatory periods, so that basically the regulatory framework allows to recognize these benefits. That also does require some change in the current regulatory framework, and I know European regulators are starting some new thinking in that space, and it's very important to find new ways of prototyping, implying regulators, so that we can potentially change some element of the regulation so that these benefits are particularly taken care of. So these are usually issues related to how to take benefits in OPEX versus more regulation on CAPEX, and so I think these are elements which need to be thought about in terms of when we come to deployment of these technologies.
Do you think companies are ready to embrace new technologies and approaches to help with their asset management strategies?
I do think TSOs and ENSTO-E, we are engaged into, I would say, significant transformation of our system, as what I was referring before. I do think that our network codes, our new network codes, are going to set new standards in terms of integrating further the operation of the system and markets. And I do think that it triggers a new innovation approach. We have to have access to more data, to more information related to flow and assets, and that is currently on a very important element of our agenda.